So we're in a transition, and we're now rebranding into BePositive. We're in a time, let's face it, where people are just being flogged with negativity and bad news and toxicity and just elevating to hatred. And what we want for this podcast is be positive as a mantra, as an attitude, as something that we can call out in those moments where we're challenged and remind ourselves that we do have optimism, hope, and encouragement. And so we invite you in. Enjoy the Be Positive podcast and enjoy hope, optimism, and encouragement.
The good, the bad, and the ugly of my life, sharing that brought hope to others. Like, oh my God, God can use a knucklehead like Greg Munck. He can use anybody. Trauma comes in many ways, and you don't have to be a combat vet to have trauma. You hear these messages of forgiveness and loving, and you think, oh my gosh, that doesn't apply to me. So many guys like me that are wanting the forgiveness and love of God, but they don't feel they deserve it because of how they're wired.
Welcome back to Be Positive. This show is on the three favorite things that I have as topics: optimism, hope, and encouragement. And haven't shook hands with anybody that says I'm all full up on all three of those. So that's what we want to extend. We're with Greg Munck and at the Lion Air Museum. The backdrop here, the Fuddy-Duddy, the B-17 bomber, the B-26 Mitchell bomber, some of the greatest, not only planes that are on display, but the stories that are told here. The docents are mostly military veterans that have flown these planes in combat. General Lyon has flown all of these planes during his military service, including the Willowdene, which I like talking about, the C-47 cargo plane, where he was flying that over North Korea during the Korean conflict and dropping off the pyramid jumpers that I was telling you about.
Right.
The interesting part about dropping these warriors off over North Korea, there was no pickup strategy. It was on their own to get out by themselves. And it's a perfect lead-in because I think when I was hearing your story in part one about PTSD, and there was a 16-year window that you chose to go it alone.
Right.
And so it's kind of our lead-in with what we're going to talk about. Where does God meet you? And I wanted to share with you a Chuck Swindoll quote. It says, "We are all faced with a series of great opportunities brilliantly disguised as impossible situations." And how many times, Greg, I want to hear the stories of where you've met impossible and then found God meeting you there.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, there's so many in my life, just the basic things of the impossible chasm that happened between my father and I when he was, an alcoholic, drug addict, and, all the pain that he caused and the hatred that I had for my dad. Yeah. It was, I hated my dad. I wanted to kill my dad. I hated everything about him. Like he's dead to me. And that was a chasm that was like, no one could, he was gone in my life. And it was impossible to ever have a relationship with him again. And so I thought. And then so he goes down his own journey. He winds up in jail, for his 12 counts of drunk driving and then drug possession. And so he gets a 6-year sentence and goes to jail. And he gets put in jail. And then in jail, he gets invited to a Bible study and gives his life to Christ. And so, I pick him up. My mom calls me from Ohio, and he's getting out of jail early for good behavior and for nonviolent crimes. And so my mom calls me up and says, "Hey, I want you to pick up your father." And I'm like, no, have someone else do it. Even Christian, new faith. I didn't trust my dad. It wasn't something I wanted to go back to. Right. I wanted to open that door. And she goes, "Can you do it for me?" So I wind up going to go pick up my dad. So I pick up my dad at Elko Jail. We're driving back, and he's like, "Oh, I became a Christian," So I'm like, "Oh yeah," I kind of chuckled, like, "Yeah, right," because there was a time in our life when, during the drugs and alcohol, that he had gotten saved, quote unquote, and then when we were going to church for 30 days, and then 30 days later he was back shooting heroin. So that really cemented my view of like, oh, God's just a crutch for weak people, Instead of shooting heroin, he's shooting up God, And so that was my view when I was younger until I had my own experience, as we talked about last time. And so there's this chasm with my dad, and so I see my dad, gets a job, working at a hotel at night, and I just thought for sure he's going back to drugs and alcohol.
Right.
He's a night manager at a motel, but his faith was real this time.
It showed up.
He started walking the walk, and he stayed sober, and he started helping people in recovery. And so after about 3 years, I started having lunches with him, and I would go, Dad, why would you let me do cocaine with you? And he would just weep before me and just beg for forgiveness. And so it was, and even so, Rob, I can just tell you, it wasn't right away. It wasn't like, oh, that's a good lunch, we're good.
Yeah.
No, it was a 2-3 year period of reconciliation.
Yeah.
And the only thing, that chasm that was there was only achieved by his heart has been transformed by Jesus, and mine was. And that was the great reconciler. That was the only reconciler.
Yeah.
And without that, there's no doubt I wouldn't have talked to him since then.
I think about that, and everyone has their family story, and I have my own story of family member that I don't want to forgive. That seems impossible to me, just because, not even to the same graphic levels that you've experienced with your dad, but similar.
Right.
Where the only thing that this relationship has produced for me is for toxicity and pain and regret and wanting it all to go away,
right,
not come together.
Yeah.
And so in that spirit, what do you do when you don't want to, when you don't want to forgive?
You can forgive somebody and not be best friends with somebody, and if somebody has hurt you and caused harm to you, if they're not willing to meet you halfway or even step in and own anything, or then it's not something you need to have in your life every day. But you as a person that deals with that hurt, you have to come to a place where you let that go. You let that pain and that go, so it doesn't manifest itself negatively on you. It's like there's a lot of wolves in a china shop in our lives, and they come in and they wreak havoc, and they're on to the next china shop to do, and you're left with this mess.
Yeah, the mess
and the anger and the frustration, and so you just have to let that person be. I don't know the situation. I don't know, but name it, whatever bull comes in your life and breaks up your china shop, and you pick it up. You have to, because bitterness will kill you.
Yeah.
Bitterness will sow a seed that's not good.
That's what's resonating in my mind as you're responding, and I'm thinking about, okay, who's the one that's carrying this around?
Yeah.
My brother's not carrying it around.
Yeah.
He doesn't think there's a problem, and I'm the one that's filled with resentment and bitterness and anger and trauma. So I'm carrying it.
Right.
It's not like it just goes away with, I'm not going to forgive you.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can only speak from my experience, that to have that opportunity with my father, to sit across from him and go through it, and again, it wasn't one conversation.
Yeah.
It wasn't one moment. It was multiple, and it led to that place of forgiveness. And so, each situation there's no easy way. There's no, just do these steps and it's going to all work out.
The 3 steps of faith, and then all of a sudden I'm good.
Yeah, you're good, or you're not going to have conflict, or you're not going to have issues with people, or you're not going to have problems, in your life. And, there's people that are safe, and there's people that aren't. And stick with the people that are safe.
Yeah. Your dad sounds like he earned the right of not being lovable. And so did you have that moment in forgiveness where you go, I love you, Dad?
Yes, I did. On a father-son blood level, I had that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Let me try to explain that.
Yeah.
For anyone who's grown up like I did, raised by wolves is what the term I like to use, or grown up in chaos, I don't have a typical relationship with my parents. My mom did the best she could, and she had to work full time to just support us. We were evicted and moving out, and she was always there. She was there, and she wasn't. I wasn't. She was. I didn't have emotionally. She wasn't emotionally loving. very strong woman, and so I didn't have a good relationship with her, and she was always covering for Dad and helping Dad, and so anyway, I just didn't have a strong relationship with my parents, and then even though I've forgiven my dad, even though I love my father, I just don't have that fatherly relationship that I want to have, with my boys and my daughter.
Yeah.
I have to kind of remind myself on a blood level, like, oh, he's my dad. Oh yeah, I got to call my dad.
Yeah.
Because the way I grew up, my friends were my family. I couldn't rely on my family.
Right.
And so now, even though I've forgiven my dad and I do love him, and we can give our testimonies together, and he's at church with me, and I can have a relationship with my dad, but there's still, it's not your typical relationship.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. It prompts a question. This is not a comfortable question. I'm a little uncomfortable in asking, but as a dad,
Yeah.
have you seen your dad show up in you
Oh,
at times?
yeah. Yeah.
What do you do with that? I mean, that's
It's,
not
yeah.
pretty.
No. It's so funny when you say that. I went right to the good things about my father. Isn't that? And then, because there's some things about my dad, is his emotional connection, his expressing love through touch, and just he was emotionally available, right, as a father, but he was an addict, so he was a mess, and that made him not all those things that he was inherently, but some of the tough things, yeah, it was more of his quirkiness and the things he does, There's not, because I really sought my whole life. It was an example of what not to be.
Yeah.
So I haven't gone down those roads. So
I think about that in the context of trauma. And trauma shows up no matter what.
Right.
Faith or no faith, trauma doesn't pick sides. It just shows up, and it's usually, at least in my experience, when I'm least expecting it.
Right.
And I think about those some traumatic moments that I've caused. And it's that, oh, Nelson, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I know better.
Yeah.
And then looking back at traumatic moments, and it's interesting your response of, gosh, my first thoughts, I'm thinking about the good things about my dad.
Yeah.
And my walk away, looking back now, oh, look at the things that have emerged positively
Right.
out of that moment.
Yeah.
Going to war is not pretty.
No.
Coming back from war with all that moral, ethical, physical damage, mental damage, that's not good, but there's good things that have come out of you being a warrior and gone to war.
Yeah. You don't have to go to combat to experience trauma, and even those in the military, anyone who's served is an amazing individual that is in a very rare class, and you deserve the utmost respect. And we can experience trauma as a child, like I did. You can experience trauma in boot camp. You can experience trauma in the anticipation of going to war or to battle. In an op of just someone can get injured or die in front of you. In a training exercise, there's trauma takes place everywhere. It doesn't have to be combat, and it's not the only trauma. And so it's like, I'm sad to say that I've become an expert in trauma, because of what has happened to me in my life, and
not what you wanted your PhD in.
No. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I wanted to start a new life. It was my wife and Jesus, and like I said, I would have been a statistic if I didn't have those two things.
Yeah.
And so I started sharing stories like the fight story in the Philippines, and I would be at men's retreats and different things, and I would share my story, and it just resonated. Just sharing the craziness, the good, the bad, and the ugly of my life, sharing that brought hope to others. Like, oh my God, if God can work in that guy's life, he can work in mine. And so, and that's what I said. If God can use a knucklehead like Greg Munck, he can use anybody, And so as I finally, started to put my stories to paper, as my daughter Taylor, she was like, Dad, you need to write these down, And so, and I remember I asked my buddy, he's a screenwriter, hey, if I record my stories, will you, write them out for me? And he's like, Greg, you don't need to have me do that. Just start typing them.
Yeah.
So I did. In 2020, I started typing out all these stories and my childhood, boot camp, and war, and what's happened since then. And it was cathartic, And one of the things I tended to do about my childhood is minimize it, or just say, oh, everyone's got issues, 'cause my mom used to say
Is
that.
that
My
your
mom-
way of bearing it?
I think so, but I think it was like my mom used to say, "Hey, we all got problems, and everyone's got problems,
Yeah.
and ours are, no different than others, or just have a different flavor, And so it was just minimum, just minimize it kind of thing, and our because there's always a worse story, like there's way worse stories than my story, and so I guess it was easy to minimize it, and so I would do that. And it wasn't until I started writing. I remember when I wrote it kind of all over the place, the book, and I was reading it back with Kimberly, because they say, before you read it out loud with somebody. And so we're making edits. And so I had all these childhood stories in the second chapter. And I remember Kimberly, she's reading it out loud and, okay, make this edit, And then and I never had read all those stories together. Like separately I would tell them, but all together I'm reading these, like the first two chapters of these stories of this kid. And it was just like, and I just start weeping. And I'm like, who is this? Like that's me. And like, I can't believe that's me. And there's this like realization, like in the totality of this trauma that I experienced as a kid. So here I am, I write these stories out, and the book's about to come out. And then I have my buddy Kenny says, hey, would you come and record? We want to do a podcast for soldiers in active duty and veterans. Can you take your, boot camp and military stories and do a little video, podcast thing and teaching? So I did like 5 sessions and like 30 minutes a piece, and I recorded those. My book's not out yet, and then I started getting all these phone calls and emails and these veterans and active duty. And it's like, oh my God, your story inspired me to really forgive my father, or inspired me to really deal with the things that I've dealt with. And I never did that. I never dealt with anything. Like I said, after 16 years. And so we had a speaker come to Crossline a couple years ago named Damon Freeman. And he's a special ops guy, combat controller, just a total stud. And everyone wanted us to meet. So we meet, and he kind of looks, I call him the vet whisperer. He kind of looks in my eyes, and he's like, looks in my eyes, and he goes, hey, Greg, do you have any battle buddies in your life, And I'm like, oh yeah, I got like, I was naming off my friends, He's like, no, I'm not talking about your friends. I'm talking about veterans, combat vets that have been through the thick of it like you, and someone to talk to, And I'm like, and I look at him and I go, no, I don't have anybody. And he's like, hey, Greg, I want you to come to my clinic. It's based on 4 pillars. Physical, we need to be best physically. Psychologically, we need to have the best psychological care and deal with it. We need to have social interaction, and the camaraderie and the brotherhood that we're talking about. And you need to have the spiritual side. Dr. Coogan from Duke University has studies that, religious interactions, religious participation helps with MTBI physically and PTSD, dealing with PTSD. And it's proven. There's research from tons of different colleges. And so he's telling me all this, and they come to the clinic and we'll pay for it. We'll fly you out. Everything's covered. It's a 5-day clinic. And I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah, it sounds good. And then I don't sign up. Then he comes back the next year and he's like, why didn't you sign up? And he gets in my face, and then I sign up. And so last February, I finally go to this 5-day clinic, and it focuses on those. And see, he goes, Greg, I know your spiritual pillar is strong. I know you have a good, strong spiritual, but most veterans don't have a strong spiritual pillar. And a lot of organizations deal with the physical. They maybe have MTBI, and they'll give you drugs, and they'll make sure you have physical therapy, and they'll do all that. Or they're really good psychologically. But then the camaraderie factor, that was my pillar. My pillar was I was disconnected from my fellow veterans.
Yeah.
And why would I can't believe, as I'm talking to you, Rob, I can't believe I did that. Yeah. I can't believe I ejected like I did, but it's because I didn't want to lean into it. And so I go to this 5-day clinic, and they had the top medical people physically, psychologically, and I met these 10 other veterans, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
And God started to reveal, like, you need to connect with other military veterans, and you need to, step into it. And so that was really the first step for me. And okay, this is last year. So that's 2023 in February that I finally deal with it. And then I meet these 10 guys, and I'm in conversation, and And that camaraderie social pillar was so epic for me that I got back and we started a monthly veteran group at my church, to get vet. It was so vital to me, like, and a lot of vets are just like me. It's like, now I just want to go it alone. Or,
Go it alone. There's the catchphrase. I mean, the vet whisperer drew this out of you, but I think about how critical that is, because Satan's plan, the most identifiable plan, is to divide and conquer.
Yep.
And so he's going to coach you into where go it alone it's a good idea.
Yep.
Do it. You're fine, Greg.
Yeah.
Go it alone.
Right.
You don't need anybody.
That's such a lie. Such a horrible lie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about the trauma that I've experienced in my lifetime, and General Lyon, that I spent. Here we are at the Lyon Air Museum, and I'm spending time with the general, and he would talk about going directly at it, not sidestepping it, not making it soft and amiable, and not being nice. Go directly at it.
Right.
Go.
Yeah.
He would mentor that into me, almost like calling plays from the sidelines.
I love it.
Go.
Yeah, because it's so funny you say that. That's my mentality in every area of my life. That is my go, conquer, go take the hill.
Yeah.
You're a Marine, adapt, overcome. That's what that's what I do.
Yeah.
Right. But in this area of my life, in this area of PTSD, in this area of trauma, I didn't want to lean into it. I didn't want to take the hill. I didn't want to deal with it until I had to. Until I met somebody that wouldn't let me go. He wouldn't let me escape, and I finally went to that clinic, and it was amazing. And I just, if there's any veteran out there that's hesitant, step into brotherhood with fellow vets, man. Get help, seek help. If the SOF clinic is available to any veteran, it's free. They'll fly you out to Tampa. They'll pay for the hotel, the food, and all the care.
This is Damon Friedman's Shield of Faith.
Yep,
right?
Yeah, it's called SOF Missions, and I'm one of now. I went there. Now I'm the West Coast ambassador, and I was invited to go speak in September at the clinic for the spiritual. I was the keynote for the spiritual pillar, and it was just amazing to go back there then as a speaker. And then now this year they invited me to speak 4 times back at the clinic, and so I'm just this is crazy what's happening. And then all these veterans my book came out, my Audible book came out, and it's incredible what God's doing.
And we have your book. Thank you so much for the gifts. We'll be providing copies of the guide written by Greg Munck, and the tales that you've experienced. So much of when I read that reminded me of dealing with pain. You're either proactive or it's pain-induced. In terms of creating change, you went the pain-induced route, carrying it on your shoulders for 16 years.
Right.
There's another step. You can choose to be proactive.
Right.
So the vets that, and just life, people, our listeners that are facing trauma right now,
right.
What do you tell them?
Yeah, I alluded to it earlier that trauma comes in many ways, and you don't have to be a combat vet to have trauma.
Right.
And so, you're processing trauma. A lot of people listening are processing trauma in some way. So, they're either the physical trauma that they have, and there's physical issues. It could be mild traumatic brain injury, MTBI.
Yeah.
And so the physical side of it, there could be the psychological side, and that's the PTSD. And then there's the spiritual side, and that's moral injury. And and the moral injury piece of that, and then just in a simple thing is, we are raised in a certain way culturally, maybe to the do's and don'ts, or spiritually, or in a household, and then all of a sudden we are asked to do something that goes against how we were raised, right. And it's unnatural to kill somebody. Yeah. For some people, psychotic it might be, but it's not natural. And so as you processing those traumas, it's coming to terms with, hey, I have something I got to deal with, and
right.
And it's those 3 modalities that happen. Yeah. It's the physical, psychological, or it's the spiritual, and they come out in those ways. So.
Yeah, and I think that from a faith walk, and we're going to touch on this as we move into part 3, but from a faith walk, that moral injury, I don't know if it gets enough attention. Where you're raised in an environment where, in the most traumatic environment, like you cited, where not to injure or harm or kill somebody, right up until you're commanded to injure, harm, and kill somebody. And then you go, okay, that does not reconcile.
Yeah.
What do I do?
So when you talk about moral injury, And you talk about, situations where we do something that goes against how we were raised. I think that's the biggest issue as I talk to veterans. Veterans love what they do.
Yeah.
And active duty personnel love what they do. They love to kill the enemy.
My son talks about it
Yeah.
all the time. Is
Right.
in his service right now, and he goes, "Pops, I can't believe I'm paid to do this."
Right. Yeah. No. And their job is to destroy the enemy, is to kill, and that's what the military is. The military is designed to destroy and to protect. Yes, it used to be called the Department of War, and they changed it to the Department of Defense. And so, as an active duty warrior, as a veteran, you go to church and you hear these messages, and then you hear these messages of forgiveness and loving, and you think, oh my gosh, that doesn't apply to me. It must not apply to me, because I'm wired this way.
Yeah.
I'm a sheepdog. I want to protect. I see a fight going on. I'm going to run to it. Kind of a little crazy, I guess, And that's what I love about Grossman's quote. There's sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. And there's sheep that just want to live their lives, and then there's wolves that want to kill and hurt, and then there's the sheepdogs that protect. And there's a lot of warriors. We're sheepdogs, and we want to protect. And so we want to do good, and we want to help, and we want to do this. And so then we're faced with, oh my gosh, but this goes against the love of God. This goes against, we hear these things, and it doesn't apply to me. It doesn't apply. But, my message is to the active duty personnel. My message is to the veteran is that God loves you just the way you are. There's so many guys like me that are wanting the forgiveness and love of God, but they don't feel they deserve it because of how they're wired, because of the sheepdog that's in them. And I want to tell them that God loves them. I want to tell them that there's nothing wrong with you, that God made you that way. God needs warriors. Yeah. David was a warrior. He needs you, and God is for you. The Christian church is for you. And there's brothers and sisters that want to embrace you for who you are, not what you need to become. You need to surrender your life and seek holiness and seek to change your life. But don't be ashamed that God made you a warrior and a sheepdog.
Hold that thought. I want to come back to this as we go into part 3. And I'm going to come back in our next segment and ask you about restoration. Thanks for joining us on the Be Positive podcast. You can find us at YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, on social media at Be Positive Cause, or at our website, bepositive.life. This is the home of optimism, hope, and encouragement. We invite you to join us and become an ambassador of optimism.